Even though there are only 4 teams on bye, when you have the Chiefs and the Cowboys on bye, it's going to be tough to submit your lineup, but I'm going to try to help you out here with these rankings. S tier, we do not need to talk about McCaffrey, Taylor, Bijan, Puka, JSN. If you have them, you put them in your lineup. Let's move on. And honestly, let's get past A tier as well. If you have Gibbs, HN, James Cook, Rico Dowdle, I know Rico Dowdle missed practice on Wednesday. He was back on Thursday. Rico Dowdle's going to play this week. You put him in your lineup. Don't stress. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you have them, you put them in your lineup. Again, if you want to argue with me about the order of it, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't spend too much time thinking about the rankings in the top 14 players because all of these options are in your starting lineup anyway. Now, going down to our B tier, this is when maybe we can discuss a few of these names. You should already know, though, you are starting Justin Jefferson. If we're looking at Jefferson, well, yes, it's been by far and away the worst season of his NFL career, where he is only averaging 15.5 fantasy points per game. This is a career low, 81 receiving yards per game. This is a career low with his touchdowns per game, with his yards per target, with his yards per route run. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with quarterback play. It seemed like he was quarterback proof last year, but what we failed to understand was, I guess Sam Darnold is just a great quarterback. Going over and looking at Igbuka, right now you have an implied team total of 25.5 points here for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This matchup against the Patriots should be a high scoring one. And if you look at what we are currently dealing with when it comes to the lack of weapons for Baker Mayfield, everything is going to be funneled through Igbuka. You have no Godwin, you have no Mike Evans, and you have no Bucky Irving for this game. That's not official, but I'm going to assume it based on Bucky not practicing Wednesday or Thursday. If you make sure you're subscribed, I will continue to give you updates all the way until Sunday morning. Igbuka is just going to be heavily involved. He is now 4 weeks removed from that injury that he had in week 6 against the San Francisco 49ers. So we're going to assume the hamstring's 100% and he is going to be a jam. Drake London is a jam as well. Drake London right now is averaging 19.1 fantasy points per game. That is more than Igbuka. That is more than Justin Jefferson. That puts him as the wide receiver 6 so far this season. This matchup in particular, going up against the Indianapolis Colts overseas, I'm always going to be a little bit wary about these overseas games, but in reality, London's demonstrated an incredibly high ceiling. He scored 3 touchdowns this past week. I had to play against them this past week. It was brutal. You put him in your lineup against Indy. And then Quinshon Judkins actually is a really good matchup now that it looks like this New York Jets team has just completely given up. They've traded 2 of their best defensive players. So now all of a sudden they don't have a decent defense. And at the same time, you actually do have the Cleveland Browns favored in this game. So you should see Cleveland be able to run the ball consistently, and Judkins does look like he is 100% from this shoulder injury. Now, moving over to our next tier, we are going to have Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren, just very stable when we're going to look at what we've had with the volume since he's returned from his injury. Again, I was concerned previously about the Kenneth Gainwell usage, but Gainwell's almost completely removed. With Jaylen Warren, he had 16 carries, 2 targets this past week for a total of 18 opportunities. The week prior, he had 16. The week before that, he had 21. So he's just a 3-down running back. I think the ceiling is going to be a little bit capped. This matchup specifically going up against the Los Angeles Chargers isn't great in Los Angeles, where you do have the Chargers as the favorites. Now, Breece Hall will be our next player. I personally just traded for Breece Hall. I will say that this is a brutal matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns. And while realistically you would want to assume, oh, okay, you're at risk for Breece Hall just shutting down his season and kind of giving up on the year. Clearly, he was kicking and screaming, trying to get traded out of the New York Jets organization earlier this week. Who can blame the guy? I think that the reason he is going to toughen up and the reason why he is going to try to have a good end of this season is if you are looking at his contract situation this offseason, he needs all the leverage that he can get. He's a running back that is going in to his second deal. He's dealt with the significant injury in the past. So I'm going to assume the last thing that Breece Hall wants is to end this season with an injury, whether real or fake, impacting his negotiation ability for his next contract. So I'm assuming we're still getting Breece Hall trying his very best through the end of the year. This is a brutal matchup against the Cleveland Browns, though, where the Browns have been great against opposing running backs. The saving grace that I think we have with Breece this week, though, is he should be used as a receiver. Now, moving over to our next player, we are going to have Davante Adams. With Davante Adams, he's currently averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game so far this season. It's a really strong matchup against the Niners, where you have an implied team total of 27 points for the Los Angeles Rams. So we should see a tremendous amount of dropbacks for Matthew Stafford, as that's been the case pretty much all year. And with Puka Nacua, he's 100%, but Davante Adams still is getting there with the receiving touchdowns almost every week. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to have Michael Pittman Jr. miss practice on Wednesday, but practice in full on Thursday. So we're going to assume that he is 100%. There is nothing to be concerned about with him. In terms of the raw volume that he's received, it's not like he's averaging that many targets per game, but this matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, again, the Indianapolis Colts have an implied team total of 27.5 points. I believe the only teams that project to score more than Indy this week are actually going to be the Detroit Lions and the Buffalo Bills. So it should be a big bounce back spot, and Pittman has cemented himself as the alpha. Zay Flowers will be our next wide receiver. If you were just using underdog projections to make these rankings, maybe y'all think that's more important than my opinion. I know it probably is. They have Zay Flowers currently higher lower 67.5 receiving yards in comparison to Michael Pittman, who's higher lower 56.5. So maybe you should have Flowers higher in these ranks. Right now, you do have a tough matchup in my mind, though, traveling to Minnesota, where you do have the Baltimore Ravens projected to score fewer points. With Zay Flowers, he's averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game so far this season, but I honestly don't necessarily know how valuable that data point is, just given the fact that you had so many games being missed from Lamar. Then Ladd McConkey is also up here, higher lower 66.5 receiving yards on Underdog at the moment. So he also projects out better than Davante Adams and Michael Pittman. But with Ladd, he just hasn't shown the same consistency as what you've had with the other wide receivers. And you just have so much target competition here going up against Gadsden, Quentin Johnston, and Keenan Allen. Now, I will say it's an incredibly strong matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Ladd McConkey is averaging about 10 targets a game over the past 4 weeks. But of course, if you wanted to say, Mason, I actually would rather listen to those underdog projections than you, or if you want to say, Mason, those underdog projections are garbage, I'm going to go higher than on Michael Pittman Jr. You can find the link to Underdog in the description as well as the comment section. If you use code FLOCK, you're going to get $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you will get a gimme Aaron Rodgers pick for the game on Sunday, higher, lower, half a total yard. Underdog Fantasy is available in almost every single state. And when you use code FLOCK, you'll get free questions that you can ask in the live streams, which we are doing every single night until the end of the season. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to have Garrett Wilson. So Garrett Wilson does look like he's going to be 100% good to go. And one thing that may be beneficial for him through the rest of the year is now that this Jets defense is certifiably garbage, we just know for almost a fact that we should expect that you have target after target after target in the second half, as we know that they're going to be trailing games and Justin Fields is going to have to drop back consistently. Now, I would be a little bit hesitant to get him his first week back in, but he is averaging more points per game than Ladd, Sutton, Flowers, and Pittman, and typically you throw against the Cleveland Browns. Now, moving over to our next wide receiver, we are going to have Rome Odunze. If you are just listening to underdog projections, right now Rome is higher, lower, 52.5 receiving yards, which is much lower than what we have with some of the other wide receivers on this list. But the reason why I'm going to rank Rome higher than his projection is, one, I really like this matchup against the Giants. You have an implied team total of 25.5 points here. And if we look at Rome Odunze, you have his dad going out there crying that he needs to get involved more. So I'm going to assume that the squeaky wheel here is maybe going to get a little bit of grease. You do have Luther Burden playing, but honestly, for Rome specifically, I don't know how much Luther Burden matters. I think that's more so going to make an impact to Olamide Zaccheaus. Now, our next wide receiver will be A.J. Brown. He has already been cleared to be good to go for this game on Monday night. It will be a super exciting game on Monday night. I swear to God, if YouTube TV doesn't figure out their crap. But regardless, I know that A.J. Brown's been much worse than Devonta Smith so far this season. But coming out of the bye, I think you have to assume when he's 100% from this hamstring that he has figured it out. And there's no reason for him to keep crying. It's not like he got traded. Moving to Nico Collins. I am starting Nico Collins on my own fantasy team. I am really hoping that we see Nico get back to what he was last season. Is it going to happen? No. But he is still solidly the wide receiver one here. A big issue that you're going to have with Nico this week, though, is you have no CJ Stroud. Davis Mills is a very clear downgrade. Nico this past week with Davis Mills, though, was able to have 11 targets, 7 receptions, and 75 receiving yards. Now, Jalen Waddle is a wide receiver I just traded for. If y'all saw the Flock League video, came out today, y'all see I traded away Rome Odunze as well as Travis Etienne for Jalen Waddle, Breece Hall, and some fab dollars. And what's actually funny is if you're looking at just the raw underdog projections this week, they have Waddle higher, lower 64.5 receiving yards comparison to Rome Odunze higher, lower 52.5. But a big difference between the offenses will be that you just don't have that much touchdown upside for the Miami Dolphins. This week in particular, though, you actually do have Miami projecting to score more points than like the Houston Texans. They have an implied team total of 20.5. And obviously, they're not going to be able to run the ball against the second half against the Buffalo Bills. They're going to have to throw it over and over and over again. Chris Olave is in an offense that's much worse than Miami. Right now, you have the Saints projected to score 3.5 fewer points than the Miami Dolphins in a game that has a much lower over-under. But Olave is very similar to Waddle in that he's just going to see every single target in his offense, especially now that you have Shaheed dealt. Now, Deebo Samuel will be our next wide receiver, another player that's in a bad offense, but at the same time, you can at least say, oh, okay, well, he's going to get everything. You have no Terry McLaurin. You have no Luke McCaffrey. You have no Austin Eckler. So the weapons are thin, and you have an implied team total of 21 points here for Washington. So it's not like sportsbooks are telling us that, this team's going to be just a complete dumpster fire with no Jaden Daniels. They should lose the game, but they should be able to put points up while they do it. And the Devonta Smith will be our last wide receiver in this range. Devonta Smith, if it wasn't for the matchup being so bad against the Green Bay Packers, he would actually have one of my favorite underdog projections. They currently have him higher, lower 48.5 receiving yards, but it's tough to go that direction with how good this Packers defense is because right now you do have the Philadelphia Eagles this week projected out with an implied team total of only 21.5 points, which again is only like 1 point higher than the Miami Dolphins. Now, moving down to our next tier, we are going to have DeAndre Swift here. With DeAndre Swift, I think the expectations will be he's probably just the guy coming back. He got in a full practice on Thursday. This matchup against the New York Giants is one in which the Chicago Bears project to score a ton of points. Here he is averaging 15.9 fantasy points per game so far this season. And realistically, if you look at the opportunities that he has had, since the bye, he came through, he had 17, 20, and 13. Earlier in the season, he had 20, 17, 18, 22. So the usage is trending in the wrong direction, but still, if you're averaging 16 points per game, getting used as a receiver, 100% healthy, and your offense looks to score a lot of points this week, you're probably startable. Now, of course, I'll have lowered expectations because Kyle Monangai is there, but that's why DeAndre Swift is lower than these players like Breece Hall, Jalen Warren in these ranks. Now, our next name will be Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason may end up having to get nuked. I am making this ranking of Jordan Mason operating under the assumption that Aaron Jones is not going to play. But Aaron Jones did get into practice on Thursday. If Aaron Jones does end up playing, what will probably have to happen is you're going to have to go through, you're going to have to move Jordan Mason down your rankings dramatically, as Aaron Jones will be the guy that ends up with the receiving role. And of course, this matchup here for the Minnesota Vikings is one in which they're projected to lose because they have to play against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Travis Etienne will be our next player. Again, I just traded away Travis Etienne myself. I really don't like the matchup that you have going up against the Houston Texans. Right now, you have an implied team total of 19.5 points. This game has an over-under of like 37.5. It projects to be the lowest scoring game of the week. And if we are looking at this specific setup with the usage for ETN, while he did have 22 carries this past week, I mean, that was good for 52% of the carries for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The numbers look a little bit inflated, of course, because this team did end up going to overtime. Now, moving over to Rachaad White, we are making this ranking under the assumption that you are going to have no Bucky Irving. This is a tough rush defense to go up against. And at the same time, what we can say is if we are looking at Sean Tucker, he expanded his role this past week before the bye for Tampa based off Rachaad White's inability at the goal line. But if you have no Bucky Irving, Rachaad White still has been able to come through, and he's been able to have at least 15 opportunities per game every single game that you've had no Bucky. Now, Trevion Henderson will be our next running back. If we are looking at Trevion, scores 12.5 fantasy points the week without Ramondre. Of course, you don't have him seeing everything in his backfield, but he did play 77% of the snaps. He had 20 opportunities. I still believe that he is a talented running back, while at the same time, you're in a spot in which this should be a high-scoring game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, with Wan'Dale Robinson, it's a good offense now. Jackson Dart just looks incredible. I mean, if we are looking at the volume that Wan'Dale's been getting as well, he had 11 targets this past week, 4 the week prior, but then 12, 7, 7. So without Malik Neighbors, I mean, he's sitting here averaging 7.6 targets per game, a career high 60 receiving yards per game, a career high 7.9 yards per target. So it's just a much better offense, of course, with Dart. And this matchup, they actually do have an implied team total of 21 points at Chicago. It will be important to make sure that you monitor the weather. I know a lot of people are concerned about the weather here for the Chicago Bears Giants game. I will say, of course, sportsbooks, they have information about the weather, and they are putting out these projections with that in mind. Now, Stefon Diggs will be our next wide receiver. If you look at Stefon Diggs, you do currently have a bump up with the expected target volume because you have no Kayshon Boutte. Now, realistically, if you look at Diggs, he's sitting here averaging 9.6 yards per target, 2.45 yards per route run. So, like, he's been an efficient wide receiver. He just hasn't been able to get on the field. He's only averaged 23 routes run per game, according to flockfantasy.com. So, realistically, if the routes go up dramatically because you have no Kayshon Boutte, and at the same time, this level of efficiency holds, Stefon Diggs could crush this week. Now, Marvin Harrison will be our next name. If you are looking at Marv, I understand that he had the massive week this past week against the Dallas Cowboys. And of course, this past week, he was much higher in our rankings because he played against the Dallas Cowboys. This week, it's a really tough matchup that you have going up against the Seattle Seahawks. So I would be a little bit hesitant. I know he has a career high with his 7 receptions, but think about how sad that is. It's a player that has played 25 games in his NFL career, and his career high is 7 receptions. DK Metcalf is going to be in my own lineup this week. Again, Metcalf is sitting at a career low receptions per game, pretty much career low targets per game. The man just isn't getting volume. This offense doesn't function to funnel volume to their wide receivers. They would rather use 6 different tight ends. But you still have touchdown upside with DK Metcalf. I mean, we all know he's built like me. He's athletic like me. He's tall like me. He's handsome like me. He's jacked like me. So, I mean, when you have that type of physique, you're always able to go out there and have yourself a day. Romeo Doubs will be our next player. With Doubs, this matchup against Philly isn't a great one, but you have no Jaden Reed, you have no Tucker Kraft, and potentially, I would assume, you have no Matthew Golden as well. So you're actually seeing him this season with a career high 85% of this team's snap share, and you're seeing him with a career high 22.2% team target share. So Romeo Doubs is turning into kind of a must-start name. Like him versus Tedero and McMillan, Like, they're very similar with underdog projections. Rome's higher, lower, 52.5 receiving yards. Tet's higher, lower, 53.5. The reason I would go Rome, though, is I just think you have more touchdown upside in that offense. Like, realistically, with Tet, he has scored 2 touchdowns this season. Both came against the Dallas Cowboys, and you're just dealing with some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL with Bryce Young. Now, this matchup in particular, you can tell by us ranking Rico Dowdle up there as the 9th best player in fantasy football this week. It's going to be one in which the Carolina Panthers project to run the ball heavily, as they are pretty big favorites here against the New Orleans Saints, which won't happen often. Now, Khalil Shakir will be our next wide receiver. The Bills project to score a ton of points, but James Cook's good now, and they're probably going to be able to do this on the ground. Shakir averaging 12.1 fantasy points per game, which is the same exact mark that you have with Tetero and McMillan. It's actually lower than what you have with our next few wide receivers with Jordan Addison as well as Quentin Johnston. Right now, Addison's averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game, but if you're just looking at the projections that you have with JJ McCarthy, not expected to see a ton of drawbacks, not expected to see a ton of passing volume, and you have back-to-back games here for Addison with only 4 targets, and obviously this Baltimore Ravens defense is a lot healthier now than what it was. Quentin Johnston, my most drafted player on Underdog Fantasy. Super happy that we got the touchdown this past week. It was his first usable week that we have had since week 4. But realistically, the targets are now just gone. I would love to rank him higher. I would love to say like, oh, Quentin Johnston is still a must-start name. But if we're looking at the amount of targets he has had with weeks 5, 7, and 8 and 9 all combined. He didn't play in week 6, but week 5 he had 4. Week 7 he had 6. Week 8 he had 0. Week 9 he had 6. So he's had 16 targets in the last 4 games he's played. He's averaging 4 targets a game during that stretch. So the volume is just now gone. Now he's just a touchdown or bust player that's running pretty hot on touchdowns. Now, David Montgomery will be our next player. Obviously, David Montgomery, kind of a touchdown or bust running back, but this matchup in particular, they are heavily favored against Washington, so you'd assume that they should be able to run the ball consistently, especially in the second half with Montgomery. Keenan Allen, very similar to Quentin Johnston, is just trending in the wrong direction. Like, if you go ahead and look at the emergence of Gadsden, this has led us to see Keenan Allen fall over the past 2 weeks to only running 17 and 21 routes, where in the first 7 weeks of the season, his lowest mark was 26. He's actually only had 5 targets here in back-to-back games, so Keenan Allen just simply doesn't look startable at this point. Now, going over and looking at Kenneth Walker, Kenneth Walker is a running back that isn't startable because he doesn't see enough volume. Like, as a receiver, he has regressed so much, where in 2024, he was averaging 4.8 targets per game. Since then, that has come down to 1.4. And also, he is sitting with a career low of 13.3 carries per game, despite him getting to play a game this season with no Zach Charbonnet, and now Charbonnet is good to go. Kamani Vidal, I understand. Maybe you want to go ahead. Maybe you want to put him higher in these ranks, and I wouldn't fault you at all if you decided to do it. My holdup with him is, we saw him fall dramatically this past week to only 13 total opportunities. And over the past 2 weeks, he's only had 3 total targets. Now you have Joel injured. It's a spot in which this offensive line now projects to be one of the worst in the league. And I don't think Kamani Vidal is that talented of a running back. Tyrone Tracy will be our next RB. Tyrone Tracy, I thought, was going to be able to come through and see like 70+% of the snaps the same way that he did in week 1. And he split the backfield with Devin Singletary and only played 44%. And Tyrone Tracy, sadly, is not talented enough to be a startable running back in fantasy if he's playing half of the snaps for the New York Giants. DJ Moore will be our next wide receiver. If you're looking at Moore, I understand that he had the massive blow up this past week. And if you look this past week, he was higher in our rankings because what happened? He played against the Cincinnati Bengals and you had no Luther Burden. So it was a great matchup. You had no Luther Burden. You could jam in DJ Moore. Here, he doesn't get to play against the Bengals this week. Luther Burden's back, and DJ Moore, honestly, had the massive blowout, and I want to say was a tad bit lucky to get there because realistically, he still only had 6 targets. DJ Moore this season is averaging 5.5 targets per game, which is the lowest mark that we have seen since his rookie season. Now, Alec Pierce will be our next wide receiver. Alec Pierce is trending in the right direction. I mean, Alec Pierce right now is averaging a career high 6.4 targets per game, career high 3.4 receptions, 71 receiving yards, career high 2.33 yards per route run. This past week, he had 13 targets. If you start him, you at least get to watch him on the island game here in Europe with no other games going on. Juwan Jennings will be our next wide receiver. If we are looking at Jennings, I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant to go out there and say that he's a must-start player, but he's had 4 receptions every week over the past 3. You have no Ricky Pearsall. This should be a game in which there are a ton of points scored against the Los Angeles Rams. So, I mean, he is a week healthier as well. Woody Marks will be our next player. Woody Marks super low with the underdog projections this week. Currently higher, lower, 51.5 total yards. I guess maybe this just has to do with the fact that it's going to be a bad offense with no CJ Stroud. Not super concerned about the matchup that you have against the Jacksonville Jaguars at this point. And Woody Marks at the same time averaged 4 targets a game over the past 3 games. He's averaged 10 carries a game over the past 3 games. So he does seem like somebody that you can definitely start. Like, I would put him over Nick Chubb just because you do have the points per reception from Marks, where obviously you're not going to be getting that from Chubb, even if Chubb projects to have more yards. With Zach Charbonnet, if we were looking at him in comparison to Kenneth Walker, he's actually been able to come through and see more work while they've both been healthy together. Like, while Kenneth Walker is seeing a career low when it comes to his carries per game, Zach Charbonnet is seeing a career high when it comes to his carries per game with 11.4. Zach Charbonnet is also averaging 1.3 carries per game inside the 5-yard line. And if we're going to be comparing this to Kenneth Walker is averaging 0.6 carries inside the 5-yard line from a per game perspective. So you do have Sharp as the goal line back. I just think Kenneth Walker is the more talented player, and you actually have more big play upside with him. Moving over to Alvin Kamara. This is a statement ranking from Alvin Kamara. I just don't want you to put him in your lineup. He's dusted. It's over. Alvin Kamara is averaging 9.1 fantasy points per game. I don't even know if he's going to be drafted in fantasy drafts next year. It is sad, but again, he is just, it's done. Now, our next player will be Jamison Williams. With JMO, he had a big week last week, so what can you pencil in? He's not going to have a big week this week. Parker Washington, I know a lot of people are excited to put him in their lineups, but I'd say 2 things. 1, they just traded for a player named Jacoby Myers, while I understand Parker Washington's still going to be on the field, because again, every wide receiver in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense is injured. I think Parker Washington's a bad wide receiver. I think he is a bad quarterback. I think he's in a bad offense, and I think he's a bad matchup. And Jacoby is there now. Now, our last tier of players, Dermicado is a bad running back in a bad offense and a bad matchup in a committee. Don't start him. Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt is in a bad matchup in a bad offense and doesn't catch the ball. Don't start him. Kyle Monangai, I think he eats into Swift's workload. He's capping Swift in my rankings this week, but I wouldn't start him. Christian Watson would not start, but you do have big play upside. Jerry Jeudy is a stain to fantasy football. I wouldn't start him, even if you have Harold Fannin out. Jacoby Myers, Darius Slayton, Shaheed, Josh Downs. Honestly, if you check the rankings on flogfantasy.com, we're going to update this. The only player that looks startable in this range, the guy that I would put in, would actually be Darius Slayton. But I really appreciate y'all hanging out with us in this video. Again, I want to remind you, if you wanted to check out any of those underdog projections, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, as well as the comment section of this video. If you use code FLOCK, you're going to get $100 added to your account after you play your first 5. And on top of that, you're going to get a gimme Aaron Rodgers pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for that Sunday game. And you're going to be getting free questions that you can ask me in the live streams that I'm going to be live streaming every single day until the end of the season. I really appreciate you. Really hope we get to see you on a live stream sometime soon. And thank you so much for hanging out with us.